George, we have quite the story to share today. Wow, you are in for a treat today. I can't wait to hear this. This is going to be quite the adventure. You've had quite the life, to say the
Yeah.
least. So first and foremost, George, how the hell are you doing today?
I'm great. Like I genuinely I don't think there's anything that fills my bucket more than like being on podcasts and talking to awesome people. And it's like if I could just spend every day of my life doing like one of two things, but either be podcasting or just coaching and facilitating every day and let's just put people in a room with me. And so like genuinely I'm honored, humbled, excited, and beyond grateful to be here.
Appreciate that. Besides podcasting, when is your movie coming out? Because if you don't have a movie in the works about your life, what
I
is going
know.
on here?
I know. Tucker Max said to me a long time ago when I was in his kitchen, way too many bottles of wine deep. And he's like, you can't write a book that you're still in the middle of living.
Mm.
And it was a very profound piece of wisdom. And the funny thing is I get the same thing. Like, when's your next book coming out? And I was like, I wrote a cookbook, and that basically turned me off to ever wanting to write a book again. This is why I have a
Mm.
podcast, because I'll just tell you everything and you can turn it into one at some point. But I feel like I might be in the Harry Potter series now, where like part one, part two, part three, because that's what it feels like on my side. Like I feel 40 on paper, but like, I don't know, 130 in life experience. And so I'm sure one day we might have a good old Netflix documentary about the comical part of all this whole journey. And so we'll see. We'll
I
see.
would I would watch on release. So we were introduced by two-time guests of the podcast, hopefully three times soon, Jesse Strawham. When she reached out and made the connection, it's like, oh, I'm listening. If Jesse's making the connection, I am listening. For anybody that doesn't know Jesse, you need to go back into my podcast, listen to those episodes. I still
Agreed.
think about those all the time. All the
Oh
time.
yeah. Yeah,
She's a
she's
warrior.
absolutely incredible. Our show was amazing. Like she became like an instant friend
Yeah,
instantly, and I was like, I love you. Where have you been my whole life? Like,
right.
let's go. And she's just so inspiring and so powerful. And like, I was bawling my eyes out when she was on my show. Like, I got down and I cried for like a half an hour, and I was like, God, I love this woman. And like, just the definition of like resiliency and heart and focus, like incredible. So yeah, I kudos to what you just said. Go
Yeah.
listen.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, George, we're talking here to talk about you today. So introduce yourself. Tell the listeners who you are and what you do.
Yeah. The funny thing is I get asked this all the time and I've never had a scripted one. The only thing I say is I think I'm only successful because I'm stupid. And what I mean by that is I accidentally went from Marine to entrepreneur, but have always created my own way instead of following, everybody else's way. But um, I feel like God gave me my life so that nobody could hide from me and be like, I felt that way too. And just because you feel that way doesn't mean we can't change it. And I'm in the mud with you. And so, like, if I had to put it on paper, I help people find the hidden blocks and love themselves in the process and get unstuck and create different results in their life. And I tend to do it in the lens of entrepreneurship and consulting. And quite frankly, I use marketing and customer journey as the Trojan horse to get to your heart and soul. And, I use the shiny wrapping paper, but I genuinely love people. And I feel like love is missing in the world, and it's a whole lot of self-love. And so I do everything in my power to connect with people, speak life into them, and help them achieve whatever it is that they desire, because there's only one of each person listening to this. And you're here for a reason, you're unique for a reason. And I think we lose sight of that too often. And I sure did for a whole lot of my life. And I just want people to be people and love people and focus on what really matters. And I think the only thing that we go to the grave with is our memories of the experiences that we created with people. And that's,
Hmm.
I think, the most important part of being here.
So when Jesse made the connection of us, I was looking at your Instagram profile, and obviously I saw, okay, she does a lot of work for businesses and entrepreneurs. Like, that's great. This is cool. I appreciate that. But that's really
Yeah.
important. And then I dove a little deeper. Dude, your website, the about you on your website is a little too buried. I almost feel like you need to lead with that
Yeah, they'll
because
just put it right on the homepage.
I
Yeah.
was like, whoa, hold on a second.
Yeah.
This is not what I was expecting. I was expecting I went to this school, I got a degree in whatever. I've started so many startups and businesses and blah, blah, blah. It is not what I got in your about me. And your about me is, like I said, I had to dig through a little bit. Obviously, it's easy to find, but I had to dig through a little bit, and I was just blown away. I read like three. paragraphs, and I'm like, I messaged you immediately. I was like,
Yep.
because I was like, hey, what are we gonna discuss? Let's narrow down the topic. And then before you can respond, I said, never mind. We're just gonna talk about your life because
Yeah.
it's
Yep.
absolutely freaking insane. Do you ever get comments about your about page on your website?
I do. I do. And that page has been rewritten so many times. And, you know, like you said, like a lot of time, I'm already emotional saying this. A lot of the times it's hard for me to believe. Um, because like I'm young, right? I'm 40, I have two kids. But there's times that I forget. And I read a quote the other day. I was like, you know, sometimes the mountain in front of you seems like it's impossible to climb, but not so far in the future. You'll look back and realize how far you've come from that mountain, but the
Mm,
person you've become has changed you forever. And, you know, a lot of the times I forget about a lot of it because I'm on the other side of most of it and still get hit with the lessons and, you know, the challenges and all of it. But it really, really is like a muscle. And yeah, it's sobering at times. Like there's times I forget I was in the Marine Corps for 13 years, or like I was running one of my events and I look in the audience, I'm like, please tell me that's not one of my Marines. And he's like, Staff Sergeant Bryant. I'm like, nope, it's George. What are you doing here? And then like this whole world comes like flooding back in. And you know, I've had so many versions of it and there's a lot to cram in there, but I also want my story just to almost be a permission slip for people to pick up a pen and write a new one and stop reading the one of their old life, but not get into the bucket of like feeling bad for me or, you know, over empathizing or like, oh, poor you. Like, I feel like God put this in front of me to make me the man that I am today. And I'm grateful for every ounce of it. But it's hard to encapsulate a lot of times. It's really, really hard to like share those pieces and have it resonate at a level. And I find some people see it and some people see underneath it. And I love that. And I'm like, hey, you see me, like, thank you for like
mm,
seeing me.
mm.
And you know, I think everybody's story is unique. And one of the challenges that I had forever is I allowed my story to define me instead of defining what my new story would be and just start writing it. And you know, that's my hope and inspiration. And I'm good at business, so I might as well do both at the same time, right? And help you write your story through your business since it's a really easy business game and field to play on. And so yeah, it's I do get a lot and I've had many versions and through all of it, I've been open about the bulimia and the abuse and the addictions and you know all those situations. And quite frankly, I love it. I love being able to meet people and be like, I understand. Like I genuinely understand. Like, and I know, and I'm not in your shoes but I'm pretty close to relating like how deep and dark it can get, and I'm here with you, right? Like,
Mm.
you know, it's no one's alone in this game, and I think that that's why I share it so much. It's like my sobriety as well. It's just kind of a constant reminder of like where I came from, but also it kind of closes my back doors of like, oh, well, you can't figure this out or you can't overcome this, and I'm like, how much more evidence do I need? Right? Like, how much more do I need? And so it's a lot easier now instead of resisting it. But yeah, it's something I can say now for the first time in my life. Like I'm incredibly proud of myself. Not because of what I've accomplished, not because of what I've overcome, but because I just choose to keep playing and give meaning to whatever shows up and not let it define who I am.
Amazing. Amazing. Like I said, everyone's in for a treat this episode. And I want to call out. So before I have an episode, I've done 160 plus of these now. I usually have an outline, I have a bunch of notes, and I have some notes. But
Yeah.
I'm reading your story, and I was like, you know what? This is going to be one of the very few, if not the first time, I'm just going to roll with just a deep conversation with you and see where it goes. I don't want to like lead this conversation and stick to a script. I want to see where this goes
Yeah.
because I don't know your life. You know your life. And it's like I said, what a roller coaster ride. And I don't want to compare you to anybody else because your journey is your own journey and it's just absolutely amazing up and down. It's almost Goggins-esque, right? I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, I have read both of his books. I'm a huge fan of him. He inspires me, motivates me to
Love
get
his
off my
books.
ass, right?
Love his books.
You have similarities with him. And I'm reading this. I was like, I can't help but think there's a little Goggins in this almost. But like I said, you're your own story. I want to respect that. But I just
Yeah.
couldn't help but connect those
It's
dots.
it, it's true, and like quite frankly, like you know, never hurt me. Like I read that and I was in tears the entire time, and I'm like, yeah, like yeah, and you know, there was even a version of me in, I'd say 5, 6 years ago, where I was almost like energetically Goggins-esque and like an incredible man, like incredible man. And, you know, that actually led to a whole lot more breakdowns though, because there was a softening of me that really, really changed it when my son was born. And,
Mm,
like the intensity is what actually continued to kind of ruminate a lot of that story and trauma for a long time. And there was
mm,
like a softening needed and like a kind of a reparenting and reloving of myself of like, okay, hold on. Like I've done this intensity thing like my whole life, right? Like I did the Marine Corps, you're going to tell me you're going to cut my legs off. And then I'm like, no, I'm keeping them. And then I tie a world record and I do all this crap. And I was like, but at some point, like I had to take my foot off the gas and realize that I was also like intensely running away from everything I had in that moment. And that's when I really like started to soften. And so yeah, there's that book hit me at a very, very deep level. And I was like, yeah, right. And it's
mm.
in some of it, like I was the kindergarten version. Like I didn't, try to become a SEAL. I joined the Marine Corps and went that way. And but a lot of it resonated so deeply. And I also just like want to acknowledge you and thank you for talking about the uniqueness of people's stories, because I think one of the challenges that I see a lot in people that I coach or that I work with or that I'm just even friends with is we fall into this comparative trap, and
Mm.
it just creates this stagnation, and it's all relative, right? Like I have people who, I tell them about my childhood and they're like, I could never. And I'm like, yeah, but you told me about yours. And like, I don't think I could have made it through that.
Mm.
And so, it's also internalized very differently based on, who people are and how you choose to see things. And yeah, it even
Yeah.
reminds me too, like, because we're going to unpack some of this, but I have a really dear friend of mine who grew up very wealthy. His father was like very, very wealthy. And like I went to St. Louis to do an intensive with him. He's like, you can just stay in my dad's house. He's out of town. I'm like, all right, we pull down the driveway. It's a 26,000 square foot house. So you want to talk about like the loneliest night of my life? I slept in the movie theater because it was like the tightest space. And I was like, yeah,
Wow.
I don't need all this space. But he looked me dead in the eyes. Like, you want to know what game I played as a kid? And he's like, I was 8 years old and I used to hide in the house and see how long it took for them to find me. And the longest was 6 days before anyone
Oh,
noticed
you
I wasn't there. And like I think about that and
like Home Alone.
I'm like, I can't even fathom what that would feel like, right? And so I also think it's important in hearing people's stories and reading about people like Goggins or even me sharing mine, like to understand that it's all relative
Mm.
and every experience and our perspective of those experiences is drastically different. But hopefully it serves as like a permission slip or a piece of inspiration to pick up a nugget and realize that really it's not our relationship with it that determines it or how bad or hard it was. It's really what we do with it. Right.
Mm.
And
Mm.
and one of the things I've said for years, and this was a mantra that I said to myself a ton, is that my level of healing never had to match my level of trauma, but I just had to choose to let the story go.
Mm.
And I say this to people a lot because I share my story and people ask me, but I'm also very, very hesitant about a lot of details because I don't want people to trauma bond or like, oh, I get it too. And I was like, but you got to remember a lot of the things I experienced weren't only because I experienced them, but also because I was more addicted to reliving that experience instead of picking up a pen to write a new page, because that meant I had to let go of that old identity and
Mm.
decide who I wanted to be. And so it's a really kind of sticky situation in how I see it, which is like really why on my podcast, like if you go, I've been on over like 10,000 podcasts in a decade, but if you go back like, you know, 8 years, 9 years, and you listen to every podcast, it was all the same. It was like a scripted story, right? And I was like, that was actually false authenticity. It was like, let me
Mm.
tell you just enough to keep you away from like how I really feel.
Wow.
And I would bond over that story and I would get so many people to feel for me, but it was keeping us both stuck
Mm.
because I'm like, yeah, here's my story. This happened. And this, I could even tell you the script today. It's like mind blowing how deeply ingrained it was for me. But I was reliving it so many times that I was just refusing to let it go and be like, who am I today? Right. And even when people ask me that question, like, well, who are you? I'm like, well, today I'm like an A- dad. I'm a B+ ex-husband, right? Like I'll give myself a C as an entrepreneur and a boss today. But like as a man, like I loved a few people today. I filled their buckets. I connected with them deeply. So like A- today. That might
Amazing.
change tomorrow, right? Because there's so many things out of my control, but I got trapped in the past for so long and it was a prison that I created and I had the key. And
Mm.
so I'm always like now I feel like this fiduciary almost responsibility, for lack of better terms, to be like, yeah, and when I share my story and when I talk about those details, I don't need you to feel bad for me. Like, I'm grateful for every ounce of them, but I want you to find a permission slip for yourself to choose to write a new page, or to change one of the circumstances in your life, or believe in yourself and love yourself enough to take a chance to try something you haven't tried and see if you can rewrite that story.
Wow. Amazingly well said. And I know the audience is like, "What happened? What's the story?" We're gonna get to it. Let's
Yeah,
just do it.
yeah.
Let's dive into it. But I want to start by saying you have what I think most people would consider a successful life. You're
Mm,
successful in what you're doing. You just gave yourself an A, B, and a C. I think a
yeah.
lot of people look at you and say he's got A's across the board. He's doing well for himself. Great career,
Mm,
good kids, good looking. You're in shape. You're fit.
mm-hmm,
A lot of people want what you want.
mm-hmm.
I want to connect with people through this episode by saying, not every journey, not every road is the same. Not everyone has it easy. And there's a lot of people that are going to connect with you through some of your hard times. And that's what we're going to go through. So people listening to this know that they might be going through something just absolutely terrible right now, struggling with life. I want them to hear this and I want them to see how you came out on the other side.
Yeah.
And that's my hope for this episode. That's my hope for my podcast.
Yeah. And I love that. And I'm so glad that you said that too, because yes, on paper things look a certain way, but like God has a sense of humor. And every time I think there's a finish line, he very quickly pulls the rug out from
Oh, yeah.
underneath me. And just to even hit one thing that you said, like I was a Marine, I tied world records, I did triathlons, I did all that. And 2 years ago, I was 100 pounds heavier
Mm.
for some time. Like for the first time in my life at 40 years old, I have a six pack. I don't even know how I got it, but like
Yeah. Let me know.
there's never, I do know now, like I figured it out. I reverse engineered it. It's staying forever now. Right.
We'll have to do
But
an
I
episode
also,
on that.
I also think that like, one of the traps is, and even unpacking this, like just because it looks a certain way on the outside
Mhm.
doesn't mean that it's that same way on the inside. It's like a duck on the water, right? Like it looks calm, but underneath the surface, those feet are going a million miles a minute. And we don't know what's happening in somebody's world or in somebody's life. And
Very true.
it's a constant, reminder of like this is a game of the inputs, not the game of the results, right? And the
Mm.
moment you think you've made it, you better buckle that seatbelt because it's going to get slammed in your face pretty quickly. Because just to even hit that, like as an entrepreneur, like there was a time 3, 4 years ago, like I was making buku bank, all the houses, the cars, the horses. And I was 100 pounds heavier and nobody said a thing for me. I was the most depressed,
Mm.
saddest, disconnected father that existed. Right. And in the last year, I've navigated like a conscious uncoupling, a divorce, a separation, rebuilding the entire business from the ground up because it was out of alignment. And I think it's so easy to put labels on people. And I think it's kind of a disservice as well, because, we're all humans. We all put pants on the same in the morning and we're all hit in the face with life. And quite frankly, the evidence of your life or the results of your life, or the money in your bank account or the cars you drive don't define who you are. And I
Mhm.
think that that's one of the biggest challenges that I see is people put labels on me and they're like, yeah, I'm blank. And that label has an assumption that comes with it. And that assumption prevents connection, because the amount of times nobody asked me like, hey, how are you doing, or like, hey, do
Mm.
you need anything? And I'm like, and not their job to, but like just because things look a certain way doesn't mean they feel the same way on the inside.
Well, let's go under the hood. And I have your about page on your website up because I want to start it and then you take it and kind of run with
Yeah,
it. I'll
go.
ask you questions throughout.
Yeah,
Okay, so on your about page, photo of you. Mm, Clearly, you don't have the six pack that you're talking about
yeah,
currently. It says addicted to chaos. Let's just
yeah,
get this started. It says, I came into this world with a mother addicted to cocaine, a severe mental illness, which we'll have to hit on, and a
yep.
dysfunctional family. The messages I received about love caused me to create narratives about how I needed to relate to others. I'm going to stop right there. There's a lot more to go. I want you to just start telling your story. So you came into this world. So your mom was addicted to cocaine.
Yeah, yeah, both my parents, and my mom will probably listen to this, and we've talked about all of this. And my father's no longer with us, but I, even before I get into this, right, and part of my healing journey was also understanding what was happening on the other side, right? And my mom was like the youngest of 11, was abused her whole life,
Mm.
my father had five fathers by the time he was six and saw his mother beaten and then lost his brother right when he got back from Vietnam. And so my perspective has shifted on this drastically because I look at my parents and what they did for me, and I'm like, how did I even make it and how did they do that? And it was a big perspective shift for me. But yeah, in genuine nature, like it was a feast or famine, get abused and then be bought back with love my
Mm.
whole childhood, right? And they struggled with drug addiction. They struggled with a lot of stuff. There's a lot of emotional abuse, a lot of physical abuse. I was sexually abused, but not by family members, by women that were babysitters and trusted confidence to watch me. And that led to like a whole lot of stuff as a kid. And then we moved a lot. I was the only white kid in my class for 3 years in Connecticut. So my front teeth were knocked out like 4 or 5 times by the time I was like 15. And then we moved to like Yuppieville, Massachusetts. Then I was bullied and beat up and, basically started to really raise myself at like 13 because my parents were in the thick of it, massive divorce, social services, welfare checks a couple times a day from the local police. And we're in this small, like, suburb area where if somebody knows, everybody knows because we're in like rich Whiteville living in my grandmother's house that she was paying for. And like on the surface, everything looked great, but underneath, it was not. And so, yeah, I say this, and I haven't talked about this in a long time. It's weird. It's weird to grow up in that home, like a couple packs of cigarettes a day, everybody yelling, parents abusing each other, threatening each other, people in and out of the house for all these different reasons. But there was this weird thing in me as a kid where like the only thing that I ever remember is like I was like, I just don't want to be like that. Like
Mm.
I've still at this day never smoked a cigarette in my life. Like I've
Same here.
never done a hard drug. Like, and everyone's like, you were a Marine for 13 years and you've never dipped and smoked a cigarette. I'm like, no. You want to talk
No.
about holding the line? Like held that line hard. But yeah, my childhood was like riddled with a whole lot of challenges. And, like if it wasn't for a few friends that I had or their parents or youth groups that never asked questions and just kind of loved me perfectly and let me in, or my teachers that let me like stay in their offices or they passed me out of spite, I wouldn't be here today. Right. Like
Mm.
I didn't really graduate high school. I missed like 130 days my senior year because I was working three jobs. And I just had this innate drive in me, which I couldn't see at the time. And it wasn't from this place of like, oh, I'm going to make it. It was more like a survival mechanism of like, well, no one's going to really feed me. No one's going to buy me these things. No one's going to do any of these things. And so I just started creating it on my own, like paper routes at 11, lied about my age, like got a job at the ice skating rink, being the guy that yells at you for going too fast. And I was like, yeah, well, I was 3 years younger than I was supposed to be, but I needed money and I needed to be able to support myself all while navigating, the world as a kid and getting bullied and beat up. And so there was just a lot of stuff that happened very, very quickly and compressed. And then, drunk driving accident with my dad almost dying. And then that's what brought social services in. And then caseworkers, psychiatric wards a couple of times. And that was basically my childhood until, quite frankly, the weirdest thing was like I had no idea that like the military was there. I didn't care what happened. I just saw a Marine recruiter walk into my school one day and I was like, that seems like the hardest thing I can do. And it for me as a kid, it was like almost like proving like I could make it. And so, right, I was struggling with my weight. I was like 60 pounds overweight. And I tried to join the Marine Corps and they laughed at me. And they're like, you're too fat. And right, that's where the eating disorder started because I had a recruiter put me through like like a weight a wrestling diet and exercise routine. But after being abused and experiencing that, what actually ended up happening, and I've actually never talked about this, he broke me so bad in a workout, and we got so upset when I went home. And I would try to go home because I had a younger brother and I felt responsible to care for him. But then there became this point where I was like, I couldn't be there. Like my father and I were getting close to like physical blows and like just cops being called all the time. And I got so upset one day because I had so much anger and rage in my body, but I didn't want to hurt anybody that I got so upset that I threw up.
Mm.
And when I threw up, I felt better. And it was this weird feeling, like it
Wow.
was like the first time I felt in control. And that's the day I was like 15 years old that like my bulimia really, really started. And every time I would get upset, I would do that to like center and ground. But then my whole childhood was like punishment reward, right? Like I'm gonna yell at you, tell you how horrible you are, abuse you, and I'm gonna go buy you a toy. And so I went to food and I'm like, great, punishment, reward, punishment, reward, and that cycle continued. And even when I joined the Marine Corps, right? I was 17 years old when I forged my parents' signature on that paperwork. And my teachers passed me and quite frankly, and by the way, I love them. Some of them still listen to my podcast and I still talk to them to this day. Cause if it wasn't for them like getting me out of there, I wouldn't be here. Right. I'd be stuck in that town or not alive at this point, most likely. And but even then, like went to boot camp, wasn't ready, like didn't prep, didn't have support. I was just kind of working and like didn't think I was worth anything. Right. I'm like, how am I gonna do this? And boot camp was hard, like
Hmm.
hard. And like it was also quite frankly very relieving because it was the first time in my life I had structure from somebody else, like almost like parenting me through. And I went to Marine boot camp. I could barely do 4 pull-ups. And then by the time I finished, I was voted the honor grad and got meritoriously promoted. And then, that Napoleon complex took over. And I was like, oh, the only way I'm valuable in this world is if I
Hmm.
win.
Hmm.
And that kind of like lit this unhealthy fire in me, but it was like hiding from all the pain and all the trauma. Like I never processed any of it. And then I go into an organization that kind of celebrates disconnection, right?
Hmm.
Weakness is like pain is weakness leaving your body. Like you have no feelings, you're never hurt, right? Like, and so it was almost like the perfect antithesis to where I was. And so that's kind of what kicked off my Marine Corps career. And so yeah, that was basically, like childhood and I owe so many thanks of gratitude to a few dear friends of mine whose parents just never asked questions and let me sleep in the basement and put clothes on me or fed me or
Did they
uh,
know? Did they have an idea something was going on?
they knew, but they never talked about it, right?
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
think I had that probably like I mean I wasn't a horrible kid, like I never wanted to hurt anybody, like I was bullied all the time, but I had an attitude, like I had that like survival chip on my shoulder, like I was fresh, I was spicy because I was like fighting for like
Hmm.
survival, right? And then I had all this guilt, like my younger brother still to this day. I mean, I haven't talked to him in about a year. He's homeless somewhere in LA and there's like all this weight and
Yeah.
responsibility but as a kid, like it was hard. Like that was my little brother, but I couldn't survive in that situation. And so there was a lot that he got put through that I couldn't help with that led to later down in the road, him living with me and my ex-wife and almost costing me my relationship because I was so enabling and trying to protect. And we're in a really good place because the last time we talked, I shared all of this with him and he's like, that was never your responsibility. And like, you get to forgive yourself for this. And like, I'm good and I made my choices and I'll figure this out. But there's just so many like little pieces that are intermixed that I'll come back to that. And so, yeah, that was kind of like a rough summary of my childhood.
Rough is right. I'm writing down questions now.
Yeah.
At what point in your childhood did you think to yourself, okay, this isn't normal? Because as a kid, and I'm a new dad now, right? And
Yeah.
so as a kid, I don't think you know what normal is.
No.
When did your eyes kind of like awaken? Or when did you start
Like
seeing things
12,
like
like
12?
12. Yeah,
Yeah.
because my brother was 5 years younger, and then I was getting to witness things that like had happened to me, and like things just didn't add up. And then at that age, I had a couple of friends, and I'd go to their houses and I'd see their family dinners, and I'm like, what? What is this movie? Like,
Yeah.
what? Um, and it was hard, right? Like I was forced to grow up way before I ever should have been an adult, and I'm also massively grateful for it. But that perspective took quite a long time to collapse. But
Yeah.
yeah, it was about 12, and that's when like I kind of was like, oh yeah, like even my basic Maslow hierarchy of needs wasn't being met. Like I didn't feel safe. I didn't have, basic things, like things that like break my heart to think about, but my parents would just pass out from drugs or get too drunk or like they'd threaten to burn each other in their chairs. They throw hot coffee pots on each other. Like it was like really like horrible, but also like hidden in that suburban, like, oh yeah, everything's great. Cause it was like, it was all about checking the boxes, right? Like optics on the front and not so true on the back. But yeah, I'd say I was probably about 12 or so. And that's when I kind of got like a crash course and like something feels off. I had no idea what it was. But yeah, it felt off, and that's where like the survival really started to kick in. And I'd say like the big moment, I think I was like 13, 14, and we went out to dinner one night, and my dad had too much to drink and him and my mom got into a massive fight at this restaurant. And then we left in separate cars. And then I didn't see my dad come home. I heard them screaming and they disappeared. And then I went to school the next day and I came home and his truck was in the front yard totaled. And I walked in at the dinner table and they were sitting there. And my dad's face was all cut up and covered in blood. And like it looked like somebody had died. And they kind of told me what had happened. He got into an accident, hit a tree at 120 because he was trying to take his life, took his seatbelt off, like went through the windshield and
Oh my
survived.
God.
And then and then he tried to walk home and it was like a half a mile and he got to like within like, I don't know, a block of the house and the cops found him and showed up and he got arrested for a DUI. And then that's what led to social services coming in because that one thing led to another, led to another. And then when the caseworker showed up, I'll never forget this woman, Erica Cortez, like the spawn of Satan, um, showed up. That's when it kind of like all hit me. Like, this isn't normal. Like, this was not normal. Like, what I lived or experienced wasn't normal. And the hardest part is that it wasn't like that consistently. Like, there were moments when my dad was up, things were great. We'd take a vacation or he'd buy a new boat. But then the moment it was down, it was absolute chaos, fighting and screaming and abuse and take it away. And it was just this constant roller coaster,
It's like
like
a
up, like
bipolar type of situation.
1,000%. That is the easiest way to describe it. And you never knew. So it was just this constant unease and like just like never being able to rest or feel safe or any of that. And so that would be the moment where I was just like, oh, when she showed up and she's like, well, you're going to do this and I'm going to take you. I'm like, you ain't taking me anywhere. And I just deuced. And I was like, I'm out. I'm out. And I just started to really like, if I'm going to survive, like, no matter what this looks like optically, like it's up to me. And so that's when I really started to like push the pedal down. Like I got like 2, 3 jobs. I would like work in construction. I would work at KB Toys. I'd work at Dunkin' Donuts. And I like bought my first car for like $800. And I was like, all right, well, I have somewhere to sleep if I need to, if I don't feel safe going home, if I can't have another sleepover at my friend's house. And it was kind of this whole tumultuous relationship the whole time. And then that's what basically led me through like my teenage years.
Day by day was a real term,
Uh,
not just a saying.
Massive. And the worst part is I didn't feel safe going to school because I'd get bullied and picked on and beat up. And so like I would hide in Miss Johnson's office, the nurse's office. Like I would spend 4 hours a day in there, or I'd go to math class with Miss DeLuca and I'd be like, can I just sit in your room for the rest of the day? Because she was nice to me and like made me feel safe. And then like I joined sports to try to have something to do, but like I wouldn't get picked up or dropped off. And then I'd get bullied there. And so like it was like the only place that I ever felt safe was work. And so I would just bury myself in work.
Yeah.
And then there was a byproduct. Well, if I worked, I made money. If I had money, I had options. If I had options, then I could make choices. But then fear and scarcity took over. Like Supreme, God, I'm remembering so much. Like I worked at this pizza place with Greek guys, Supreme Pizza, and I loved them to pieces. Like they were like family, like 2 dads I had, but I needed money. So I would like skimp money out of the tip jar and like I would steal it. And then he confronted me one day and he's like, I hate to do this, but like I have to fire you.
Oh,
And
shit.
it was like heartbreaking. And like, I didn't want to steal. Like, I never wanted to do anything like that. But I'm like, where am I going to get food? Right. Like, where am I going to get clothes? And that feast and famine was like the weirdest thing. And the hardest part is my father had to be one of the most selfless men that I ever met, but he was so riddled with addiction and pain and trauma that it was the same fight or flight. Cause like I also remember my dad would give you the shirt off his back and go into
Oh,
withdrawals over it. But there was this so many demons at play that like programmed my whole life that played out all the way until quite frankly, like 3 years ago, when like I finally like saw it and having my son was a massive, massive shift and like realizing like, holy moly, like he doesn't get to live a life like this. And it might not be as extreme, but I'm doing it emotionally and I'm doing it with work and I'm missing all these moments and I'm convincing him that this is what a healthy relationship looks like when I'm just in a different flavor of what I lived in. And so the parallels even 30 years later were absolutely mind blowing. But yeah, that was basically what it was like.
um, can I imagine you were consistently, as especially as a kid, just constantly thinking, "Why me? Why is this happening to me?"
Probably until I was 36 years old, like
Yeah.
3, 4 years ago, like 1,000%. Like until I like really came home to God and found faith, but like really took a look in the mirror and did the work. Like why me? Like most of my life, like everywhere in some way, shape, and form. And then the same compensatory behavior everywhere. Like when I had healthy friendships or healthy relationships, I didn't know how to have those in my nervous system. So then I would break them,
Mm-hmm.
because if I broke them, then I had something to fix. And if I could fix it, I was valuable because that was my whole life. And so, like, it played out everywhere with my friendships, with my business partners, with my romantic relationships, with my ex wife. Like, it was constantly, oh, things are good. Oh, no, no, can't be good. Break, break, break. And if I couldn't break the relationship, I'd break myself. Hence why I've gained and lost 100 pounds 4 times. It's off forever now, but it wasn't always that easy. Or getting addicted to opiates because of, the pain and almost losing my legs and the traumatic brain injuries. But I was like, oh, here's a new place. I can actually feel something now, because basically what I hadn't recognized is that I was numb. Like I had just numbed my entire life. And then I go from that childhood into the Marine Corps, and I'm like, here we go. And I get celebrated to be numb, right? Like be cold, quite frankly, be a dick, right? Like it doesn't matter. Feelings don't matter. And even that carried out because I was going to do 20 years and I got medically separated, became an entrepreneur. Well, what was my new addiction? Entrepreneurship, right? No wonder why I was so successful when I started a food blog and I was a New York Times bestseller. Like it wasn't even an option because it's the only way I could feel something. And
Mm-hmm.
quite frankly, it's going to sound really, really crazy, but there was one psychologist who I remember vividly because she broke me. Because I was like, I'm incapable of feeling like after the suicide attempts and the addictions. I'm like, I don't belong here. Like, I cause more trauma in this world and more damage in this world than I do good. And I'm like, I'm just numb. And she looked me dead in the eye, like stared me down. And she's like, numb is a feeling. And it like like broke me to like really feel that and look at like how my survival mechanisms were basically just to prevent myself from feeling, because it never felt safe to feel. It never felt safe to have emotions. Like I wasn't like coddled in it. It wasn't any of that. Like I had so much rage and so much anger. But now in the work that I do and basically reading the DSM cover to cover and studying psychology my whole life to fix myself, I realized that anger was a secondary emotion. Like there was just this deep sadness in me that I'd never allowed myself to feel because I couldn't. It wasn't
Yeah.
safe to feel. No one was coming to save me. And so I did it hard. And I was like, let's make this really, really hard. And if things were easy, I'd hard them because it's the only way I could feel something. I'm like, oh, let's put my back against the wall. Let's like really break everything. Let's make 1 million and lose 1 million. Let's launch a company, say we hate it, close it, just so I have to do it again. Like it was just this massive pattern everywhere. Let's get a healthy friendship up. Let's find a reason to break it. Oh, let's lose the weight. Let's put it back on. Oh, you don't know how to operate or exist. Let's pick up this. And it was just this constant chasing, right? Like thousands of skydives, every hobby you can imagine, every new business idea you can imagine, like just constantly trying to avoid the one relationship that I didn't know how to have, which was with myself.
You mentioned something that I was going to ask. At
Yeah.
any point were you suicidal? And it sounds like you said there was multiple attempts.
Multiple times. Like the first time and this is the weird thing, and like hindsight 2020, right? And I'll be really open with this. I don't think I was ever really suicidal. I don't think I knew how to ask for help. And so I wanted attention. And so the first time I checked myself into a psych ward was when I was 16. Um, and quite frankly, it was the safest place away from my family.
Mm.
And and then that became like a mechanism. And then 2005, after I almost lost my legs in Somalia, which wasn't in combat, it was we were just out on a mission, but I got what was called exercise induced compartment syndrome simultaneously. So my legs basically almost exploded open. And
Huh,
really
what is that? How does that happen? What is that?
it's crazy. It's like shin splints times 1,000, but basically it happens to a lot of soccer players or car accidents. Matt Chan in the CrossFit world got it when he fell off a mountain bike because there was trauma to his quad and it, like ripped open because basically the blood pumps into the compartments in your calves and it has nowhere to go. So the pressure makes them like explode out. And you can die from it. And then they have to do crazy surgeries called fasciotomies, and you don't really get to make a recovery. But it happened in the middle of Somalia, like right around or on my 21st birthday. And it was in training. And but after that happened, I came home and they were like, they did a partial surgery and they're like, this isn't going to work. We're going to have to amputate your legs. And I was like, what? And quite frankly, and this is the craziest part, the only reason I fought it is because that meant they were going to medically separate me and I would have to go home and I had nowhere to go. And so I fought and fought, got a second opinion, got a doc who said, I can do the surgery and you can keep your legs, but you'll never be able to walk again. Probably won't be able to run. Like you're going to have to get out. And I was more afraid of getting out of the Marine Corps and having nowhere to go than I was about staying in. And so after all these surgeries, there was like a year of healing. I was in a wheelchair, still in the Marine Corps. And one of the ways to deal with pain, because the surgery is they have to do a fasciotomy. So they cut your leg open because of all the pressure, they can't close it. So it takes like 2 to 3 weeks on each side. And they filleted me from knee to ankle on both sides of both legs. And then twice a day, they have to debride it and then close it more and more and more. And so I was on a PCA pump, patient controlled anesthetic of just like morphine or Dilaudid or whatever they gave me. And that's what got me addicted to opiates. But after like the third surgery, the pain was like so unbearable. I just like couldn't do it anymore. So I overdosed on all my pain meds. And I took some ungodly amount, like 60 to 70 hydrocodone, 10 325. So I don't know, 30,000 milligrams of Tylenol and, 3,000 milligrams of, hydrocodone. And the craziest thing is I remember it like it was yesterday because I took it. And then I was like, yeah, this is it. And I was petrified. Like I didn't really want to die. And I was shocked when I woke up the next morning. And I still didn't know what to do, and it was pretty dark. But the fear of getting out of the Marine Corps and having no structure and having nowhere to go was greater than the fear of figuring out how to walk again or do all that. And so I was blessed with an incredible physical therapist, and because I was in the Marine Corps, I didn't have a choice. I had to go to physical therapy all day, every day, and they told me I'd never walk or run again. I ended up making a full recovery and stayed on active duty for 9 more years. And but the pain of that never really left. And the opiates stuck around for, I don't know, probably 14 more years. And even after I got out of the military, because, the VA is like a candy dispensary. So all I have to do is text them and they'll just send you more. So even as an entrepreneur, at like the height of my career, I was still taking hydrocodone every day, not for pain, but just for like self-soothing and management. But yeah, so that was the first time. And then later on in my life, once I got married and we had my son, I never got that close again, but I would self-harm. Like I would have so much rage and anger in my body that like I would want to lash out, but I never wanted to hurt people. So I'd punch myself in the face. I'd like broken my own ribs. And then I would tell people that I was suicidal and then I would do things like that. But really, somebody who owns quite a few guns, I never really fully committed. I more so did it for the scream of help because I didn't know how to ask for help. And that's like the hindsight part of this. Um, but yeah, it was it was it was an interesting journey to say the least. A lot of it's carried through, and there's so many parallels in between it. Because right after those surgeries, they basically were like, you have 30 days to pass a physical fitness test. We're going to kick you out. And that was the thing that I needed. My back's against the wall again. And I passed by like the skin of my teeth. Like I think I ran the 3 miles in 27:30 and I had 28 minutes.
Wow.
But then I realized how good I felt. And then fitness became my addiction. And then that's where I got like really deep into it. And then my dad got diagnosed with metastatic brain and lung cancer in 2005. And because I was the oldest and the only one, we had maintained a relationship. My mom I didn't speak to for 15 years, but I always wanted a dad. And so when I went to boot camp, I was separate enough away from him and I was gone. So we would text and call, and like I thought he was doing good. I didn't realize he was still using and dealing with a lot of things. And he got really, really sick. And so the Marine Corps put me on a humanitarian transfer, sent me to Rhode Island so I could be there for 6 months to take care of him. And then I basically became my father's caregiver. And that had its own slew of challenges and situations, and basically took care of him until he passed away. And I pulled him off life support because the tumor metastasized and basically gave him a stroke, and he died. And then that was in the right after I'd made a recovery from my legs. And so that was the next thing. And then that left my brother 18 where nowhere to go. So I moved him with me back to Hawaii. I was there for 3 months before they gave me orders to California, got there, and then I was in Afghanistan 3 months later. And so it was just like deployment, almost lose my legs, surgery, recovery, dad, gone, Afghanistan. And then Afghanistan was rough for me. I ended up getting like 3 or 4 traumatic brain injuries from training accidents and things like that. And then I lost quite a few Marines, but to suicide, and experienced a lot. And then when I came back from Afghanistan, I would say I was probably in like my darkest of darkest days. And the craziest thing was, and this is what we talked about before the show, after losing my dad and being there, something shifted in me. And I don't know what it was, but something shifted where I basically realized I was my father and I was my parents. I was just using different wrapping paper to justify my choices and decisions. And I started to have a lot of like come to Jesus talks with myself of like, I don't really want to do this. And I do want to be alive. I have no idea why. I have no idea for what purpose, but like at some point I have to choose to stop suffering. And of all people, the book I picked up was Rob's book, The
Mm.
Original Human Diet.
Rob Wolf, you're
And
talking about, yeah.
yeah, Rob Wolf. And I read that book cover to cover. And I struggled with my bulimia my entire Marine Corps career. It's how I dealt with the stress of deployments. I would go purge in porta potties, and then I would binge eat. And then I found CrossFit in Afghanistan because that's the only gym they built us was a CrossFit gym. And I was like,
Wow.
oh, brand new addiction. Here we go. And there's no mastery of that sport. And that's actually where I tied the world record. But I read that book and I started eating different, and I realized that I was feeling better, and it like shifted something in me. And I was like, I don't want anybody to know I'm bulimic. I don't want anybody to know that I'm struggling with these things. And as an addict, like I'll be really blunt with everybody. I figured out that the easiest place to hide was in plain sight. And so if I am in the best shape and I'm perfect PFT scores and I'm the CrossFitter, like no one's going to know I'm purging. No one's going to know I'm abusing opiates. Like no one knows because I'm right in front of you. And I made a decision with myself that I wanted to get better. And so even as an entrepreneur, I was still in the Marine Corps, and I was like, I'm going to start a food blog so I can post these recipes and eat them every day for accountability, but not tell anybody. And so that's why I started that food blog in 2010, was to be accountable to me healing myself and overcoming my bulimia without anybody knowing. And it just served as like a very, very poignant gift from God, because after that deployment, they were like, hey, we're medically separating you. And there wasn't a choice. They're like, we're going to process your paperwork and you're going to get out. And at that point, I was like, where am I going to go? And so I leaned in. And for like 8 months of the end of my career, I taught myself like how to be a food blogger, teach myself recipes and cooking, was posting it while they were processing my paperwork. And then once my papers came in, I went straight into entrepreneurship. And that's how I became a food blogger.
Which was like a best-selling book, right?
Yeah. So, yeah.
This
So,
is, dude, this is the great. Oh my God. Like, if you're listening to this as stressed as I am, you're not alone. This is unreal. This is
yeah.
unreal.
So what happened was basically I because I got medically separated, they had to pay me like SEPS pay. So they gave me like 110 grand or something on the way out the door. And then I was obviously disabled. But it wasn't enough to live off. And so all I had done is posted on that blog every day for like 18 months. And I had no idea what I was doing, like none. I was just figuring it out as I went. And then this is going to sound so silly, but somebody on the blog that was responding was like, you should make an ebook. And I'm like, what the heck's an ebook? And they kind of told me and guided me. And then I made my first ever ebook, which was like a collection of all my recipes. And I'll never forget it because I made it when I was in. And it was like 30 days left of my contract. And he asked me to make it. So I made it and sent it to him for free. And he's like, why'd you send it to me? I'm like, because you asked. And he's like, no, 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 you should sell this. I'm like, why the hell would you buy it? They're all on my website. They're like, yeah, but not in one place. And so he told me to upload it to this website called ClickBank. And he's like, you should just charge like 37 bucks and tell everybody what you're doing. And I was like, okay. And then the day I did it, I made my yearly salary in day one. And
Wow.
then I made a decade's worth of my salary in like the next week. And then I was like, well, here's my new addiction. I'll figure this one out. And, figured that one out to the tune of like a $80,000 tax bill because I didn't understand that when you made it, you didn't get to keep it because I'd never paid taxes in my life.
Yeah.
And so that started leading to business. And then, yeah, about 3 years after teaching myself how to cook, I found a publisher because someone's like, well, you should turn it into a book. And I found a publisher who's like, I'd never publish your book. You don't have a big enough audience. No way. And I hounded this dude all day. I'm like, I don't need an advance. Like, I want to do it because I needed something to focus on and convince him to let me do it. And then, yeah, wrote a cookbook and photographed it, taught myself photography. And then I loved
Unreal.
that they told me I'd never do it. And then turns out I launched it on June 10th of 2014 and became a 22-week New York Times bestseller.
The
And
last thing someone should tell you is you can't do something.
yeah, and it doesn't work anymore because I'm not driven by insecurity and fear anymore, which was a
Mm,
whole different part of my life.
mm.
Going from survival to thrival, like thriving. The truth is, like, the hardest part of my game, like my whole life, was after my son was born. And like I really dug in and like started to heal, like, being an entrepreneur and leading to that book then led to someone's like, you should make an app. And I'm like, don't know how to do that either. And then I got voted by Apple as the top health app of 2015. But then what ended up happening is that I have this food blog, 3, 4 million people a month reading my blog and my stories of these recipes I'm making. Got, almost 1 million followers on social media. Got a New York Times best-selling cookbook, and I'm on book tour purging behind stage before I speak while high on opiates. And I'm teaching people how to follow a paleo diet and be healthy. Like literally, I couldn't have hid in plain sight anymore. And even in that ecosystem, I surrounded myself with the wrong people, broken relationships. And then I got to meet Mother Ayahuasca because I was the most depressed I'd ever been, the darkest I've ever been. And my ex-wife was strong enough to put her foot down and be like, you can't be like this. And the first breakdown was like, I'm not going to let you see your kid, her daughter, or come back in the house until you go to this personal development course. Go to this personal development course. Of course, I like go through all 3 phases and I'm like, I'm going to win. And then I missed the whole point and lied my way through it. And the woman's like, if you want to have a breakthrough, you might as well staff it so you can learn this game. So I staffed it and became a personal development junkie. And then I was just continuing to try to run and hide. And then I got to my wit's end, like to the point where I was like, I really don't belong here. Like that, none of this works. Like I'm just incapable of being a good human being. And I had a psychotherapist offer me EMDR for free to help me. And EMDR is what created like the first amount of space for me. And then they introduced me to a therapist who took me through MDMA assisted psychotherapy.
Mm.
And one appointment basically broke me open because I got to feel for the first time and I got to feel with no judgment, no fear. And it was
What
mind
therapy was that? What type of therapy?
It was MDMA, so ecstasy assisted psychotherapy, like
Is
doing
that
ecstasy
kind
with a
of
therapist.
ketamine-ish, give or take?
A little, no, a little gentler than ketamine. I've also done ketamine. I don't do anything anymore. Like once I
Yeah.
healed, I was all done. But MDMA is like a flood of serotonin and dopamine. So all you feel is love for yourself. And so
Okay.
talking through every ounce of trauma and story and self-harm with like nothing but love changed my perspective and realized that I could feel. But none of that really changed anything. It opened the door, and then I basically drove our entire life into destruction. I took this successful blog and I self-sabotaged it. I stopped working, I stopped posting. It went from a millionaire to like losing like 30 grand a month. And then we basically got to our wits' end. I tried to go back to the hospital, and then they wouldn't admit me unless I admitted to them I wanted to take my life. And I was like, I don't want to admit that anymore. And then the nurse was like, listen, it's the only way you're going to get an appointment. So I did. I was like, I'm going to take my life. They admitted me to the psych ward again. This was probably like 2015, 2016, like right at the height of my career. I spent 2 days in the psych ward and I was like, I don't belong here. Like, this is not who I want to be. And I got out and I was like, I got to do something different. And I tried everything. And so I finally made the leap and I went to ayahuasca, to Costa Rica and had ayahuasca. And the craziest thing happened is like, it was probably one of the like roughest trips in my life for ayahuasca experiences. Like I had to work through trauma, bury myself in my father's grave to heal my addictions and all these things on the medicine. But then I had this like spark of clarity and I'm like, this whole life I've built is completely keeping me stuck. And so I had clarity. And in 24 hours, I made a phone call and I called a friend and I'm like, I'm giving you the entire company. take it, like no questions asked, like just have it. Change my phone number, change my email, and just disappeared off the internet for like 3 years.
Wow.
And that's when I really, really started the work. And like the work was really being in a relationship with myself. And, this was only, 8 years ago, 7, 8 years ago. And then it hasn't stopped since, but it's gotten a whole lot easier as I've like willingly faced it and stepped into it. But that's kind of like the best story arc I can give you.
Okay. I'm seeing like 1,000 different avenues we can go
Yeah.
with my next
Yeah.
question.
Yeah.
Um, I kind of want to go back to the beginning a little bit too, because
Yeah,
it was kind
please.
of on what you just said. I've done multiple episodes on ayahuasca psychedelics. I want to learn more about that. I want other people to learn more about that. And you said in the beginning, you were born with a mental illness. That's on your website.
Mhm.
I don't know if you're born with a mental, you had a severe mental illness. What is it
Oh,
or was that
not
mental?
not for me. My
Oh, your
mother, like,
mom had
yeah,
a
my
mental
mom.
illness.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
What was her mental
massively.
illness?
I think she's diagnosed like schizo and bipolar and
Wow.
quite a few other things. And I'm sure my father as well, but just would never go to a doctor. It was that Vietnam vet era of like I
Oh
have
yeah.
to handle it all myself.
Oh
And
yeah.
so yeah. Um, yeah, so not me, just them. And so that was just an interesting part of the game.
This is kind of a tough question for me to ask. I'm gonna do this anyways. Do you know what love is, or did you know what love is? And like, no.
I didn't know what love was until my son was born. Like
And it was just,
genuinely.
and when was that? What year was that?
That was 2016. He'll be 8 soon. And his birth probably led to my breakdown and breakthrough, but was probably one of the hardest things because that was a feeling I'd never felt in my entire life,
Wow.
ever. And when I felt it, I didn't know what to do with it. And so I
Mm.
ran. Like I was very absent in the first couple of years of his life and just hiding in the business. And that is a feeling I'd never felt before in my life. It had changed everything for me, but it wasn't easy to integrate or understand. It broke me way before. It broke me down way before it broke me open. And now, yeah, I feel love every single day for every person I meet, for every moment I have with every human being. Like I fight for love in this world. Like it's what I stand for. It's why I have hard conversations. It's why I go against the grain. I call out businesses and I'm like, no, no, no. Like this is what life feels like is love. And I really stand for life. But no, I don't think I did because love for me was chaos. Love for me was the
Yeah.
only time we love each other is if we're yelling at each other or fighting or breaking stuff or then making up. And it was this, it's hard to admit. Like it's hard to admit, but yeah, no, like knowing the feeling that I had when my son was born, I'd never felt that in my life. Just felt cold.
Do you have any fear being a dad of perhaps inflicting some of the pain on your son that you felt growing up? Because I know that's something that I'm very aware of as a dad myself is I want to make sure my child grows up feeling XYZ or doesn't experience XYZ. Do you have a fear of that?
I don't anymore. I don't anymore. I did for a long time. And one of the things that I say to people, there's a Tick Not Hunt quote I love that says awareness is the finish line. And when you have the awareness, typically it prevents in the way. And as a parent, I'm going to make mistakes. I'm going to F up. I'm going to, screw up. I'm going to stumble, but it's the recovery and how it's addressed that changes the paradigm and belief, right? Like we all
Mm,
do our best. And I did have that fear for a long time until I was surrounded by the evidence with my son of like, no, 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 like my son feels safe and he feels loved and supported and even navigating a very hard divorce and choosing to find love in the process and now still living with her and us being like best friends and the best teammates we've ever been. Navigating all of that was because I didn't want my son to have a belief that that had to be bad or that he had to choose. And like I stood for love. And I was like, we're going to make this what we want it to be, which is love.
mm,
And so I had the fear But I also recognize even the personal development guy, I mean, and doing this work for like, 15 years to get to the level that I'm at now, which is really still just a student, but like just awarenesses and perspectives to support me, is that if we're driven by fear, we'll create the fear. Like what you resist persists. And as hard of a muscle as it is to flex, like fear and faith come out in the same conversation. And I've learned that living in faith and belief in possibility is the only thing that prevents those fears from coming a reality. And
Mm.
that was a long, long lesson to learn, because everything I've feared in my life, I've created as a reality. And it's comforting, right? Like I know if you put my back against the wall, I'm like, oh, there's the right amount of pressure. Here we go again. But it was at what cost?
Yeah.
And the cost for me was I hurt a lot of people and I bled on a lot of people that didn't cut me. And, my mission every day is to wake up and make this world better. And I don't go about it as I have to make up for what I did, because it was never intentional, but I sure as hell get to stand for something different. And regardless of how I feel, choose to find the empowering, loving perspective, right? Like even in scripture, it's turn the other cheek, but it's not look away. It's take the side of anger and resentment and give them the side of softness, no matter what,
Mm.
because I can't allow any of my previous choices or any of those mistakes or anything that was done to me to change who I am, or I've already lost the game. Like I get to choose who I get to be, and I get to choose love no matter what shows up in front of me. And it's an empowering perspective, but it's also a muscle.
I get the feeling like I could just feel like a lightness when you talk about that subject compared to the rest of the episode.
Yeah.
Like, um, I have a feeling you're just less exhausted. It's just easier living like this.
It's I can't even the hardest part was conditioning my nervous system for calm. Like, to be really blunt about it. Like, I'll never forget, I had a shaman in Costa Rica look me in the eye and he's like, "You've never been quiet enough to hear God's whispers." And I was like, "No, no, no, I can't be quiet. I can't sit still. Like something is always in fight or flight, like always." And he looked me dead in the eye and he's like, "I challenge you to sit still for 5 minutes." I couldn't do it. Like I couldn't do it. Like I needed to be distracted or boom, boom, boom. Now the number one thing I do every day is like, if you see me, you will just see me sitting in a chair, staring at nothing and just being for an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours. I sit out in nature. I'll just park my car and like just look at the lake, or I'll sit there and
Wow.
watch my son. Like, but I never realized how much of a muscle it was. And I had 35 years of conditioning my nervous system with the opposite muscle and not once ever tried flexing the other side of it. So yeah, I feel like I can fly now. Like I'm like peace. And like quite frankly, it doesn't matter what's happening around me. Like even like, a year ago when we lost everything again, I got woken up out of fear and they're like, "What are you gonna do?" I'm like, "I'm going to the gym. Like I'll deal with it later. Like I'm fine. Like you're not getting into my peace anymore. Like nothing is getting in, because it's my perspective that changes how I see a situation, which allows me to make the choices that would correct that situation. And I can't be a victim of them anymore. But now that I know the other side, like there is no amount of anything that will ever allow me back into that chaos. And it's something that I protect with like
Mm.
every ounce of me. And even when like emotions come up and I cry every day and things feel challenging, I just have the tools and the processes now to like find that peace, knowing that like really how I go about the next moment or the next choice is determining what results I'm going to get in the future, because I'm planting a seed with every choice, with every word, with every thought. And if I don't like the harvest that's coming down the pipeline, it's because I planted the wrong seed and I'm the one that's in control of that seed. And so it's really a big perspective shift for me.
Yeah, your perspective is absolutely insane. If someone had lived through like 1/10 of what you just told, I don't know if they would have this perspective or anywhere near it. It's unbelievable. Um, is ayahuasca, I know you said the birth of your son, was ayahuasca kind of like another tipping point as far as like a perspective
You
goes to
know,
see
it's
light?
what ayahuasca is like. So here's the thing. I don't think anybody needs it, right? I think it's something that if you feel called to, you have to answer the call. But really what it was like 20 years of therapy in one night. And what it allowed me to do was to face the things that I never wanted to face because my conscious mind couldn't hide it on the medicine. Right. And I met God on ayahuasca, like to be really blunt and frank with people. But like, I don't know, I've probably read Man's Search for Meaning from Viktor Frankl on like 50 times, right? Like if you can be a psychologist locked up in a concentration camp and not give your power away, right? Like it really boils down to perspective. But I really feel like at this point in my life, like the only reason it's in front of me is because it's the path to make me the man that I pray to become. And so who am I to question why it's in front of me instead of just picking up the phone and making the choice, right? And that's where it boils down to, because even in the personal development world, it's only two buckets: victim, responsible. Jocko nailed it. 100% responsible 100% of the time, right? Like there's so many levels of this game, but the reason I lost for so long is because I was a victim to everything: victim to the circumstance, victim to the story, victim to everybody else, victim to my childhood, victim to everything. When in actuality, like I'm the one in the driver's wheel the entire time.
Mm.
And that perspective shift is the biggest thing that's ever really, really supported me. And no, not easy. Like I talk about some of this, like it was like an overnight thing. Like, no, no, no. Like there were year stretches that I was like not getting off the couch and depressed and taking opiates and all of it. And my perspective now comes from living the complete other side and recognizing how hard I made it on myself just because I didn't have the courage to feel a feeling and make a different choice. And like that's the craziest part about the perspective. Like I've been through every trauma modality you can imagine: cognitive behavioral therapy, cognitive processing therapy, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, group therapy, individual therapy. I've done ketamine, I've done mushrooms, I've done plant medicine. And quite frankly, they all led me to the same place. They gave me an ability to actually feel a feeling, but they all had me do the same thing after, which is what's the one new behavior that's going to help you be the person you want to become. So I just
Mm.
decided to skip that whole process. And I'm like, great, I feel like crap. Well, what's the one thing I would do anyways? I'll feel the feeling while I'm doing this new thing. And at least I'm getting evidence and creating something new in my life. And that's just been kind of me shifting over and over and over again into what's actually going to happen. And I've learned at this point in my life, stagnation doesn't exist. It's progress or death. And so whether I think I'm paused or not, any moment I'm a victim to my circumstance or I'm a victim to my story, I'm the one that's choosing not to put a new seed in the ground. And I can't complain about the fact that when I get hungry in 30 days, there's not a harvest there because I'm still the one that has the seeds.
Mm.
And like I study psychology, I study human history, I look at all of it. I literally think the Industrial Revolution was probably the biggest downside to humanity because we figured out the game as humans. We figured out how to survive, right? We won the race. Like we have comfort, we have food at our disposal. Well, 300 years ago, you could have walked in, clubbed my wife, killed my family, left me with one kid, burnt every one of my crops. And if my kid wanted to survive or I wanted a chance, it didn't matter how I felt. I still had to go procure food and go procure water, regardless of how I felt. And now we're just surrounded by things that allow us to sit. And quite frankly, I've removed all of them. Like I don't have any of that crap anymore. I sold all the cars, got rid of all the houses. Like I drive my Subaru Outback Wilderness, live in my house in Montana, and I'm like, I want nothing but space. Like I want the ability to feel my feelings and to be in a relationship with myself and create meaning. And even in that bucket, it's just like if I have the ability in this moment to influence my future, why am I wasting it? And I think the benefit of seeing the things that I saw and losing like 22 Marines to suicide and witnessing three of them and all these other experiences that I've seen, in my belief, was the perspective for me to recognize the value of time and life. And if I want my son to have an example, or I want more time with my son in the future, I want to be here longer, or I want to have the resources to be able to create moments and memories with him, I can't let a second on that clock go by and not do something intentional with it. And if I'm not, someone else is driving and I can't be upset about the results that come from the work that I didn't do.
You're a master. I didn't realize, I think you just said you witnessed three suicides by your friends.
Yeah. Yeah. Those were the hardest ones. Those were the hardest ones. Nothing else compared. But yeah, one of them called me right before he hung himself to come help him, not knowing that that's what I was going to walk in on. Another one invited us over for his
Are you
kid's birth.
fuck?
Yeah, another one invited us over for his kid's birthday party and overdosed before we got there. And so he went in front of us, and then another guy showed up in the middle of a formation outside of the company office one day where all like 800 Fs were there and just walked in and stuck a pistol in his mouth. And so, yeah, that was all in like a 2 year period. Those are the ones that broke me the most. Those are the ones that, like, I still have their names hanging up on a plaque in my office. And those were the hardest ones to collapse. They made everything else feel easy because I didn't get it. I didn't understand. I felt useless. What could I have done? Like that was probably those were kind of the hardest ones. And they're really what like shifted my own perspective and like thinking into the future when I was suicidal and having those thoughts. Like those were the ones that brought me back to like, what are you doing? Like, and getting to see the fallout of that and still see one of them and just to respect them and their names. But I'm still friends with their former wives on social and seeing their kids grow up and like I couldn't do that. There's so much that follows. And
Yeah, I have to ask you, not to make you relive that whatsoever. It's more of if somebody's actually listening to this and thinking, and they're in the same boat as that, as your friends and those people, what would you tell them right now if they're listening?
yeah, I like to be really blunt about it. If you're having the thought you already know you don't want to, connect with somebody. Like I can't even put into perspective the value of a human life. Like every one of us is so unique. And it can feel so overwhelming to be so surrounded by so much pain and so much trauma, but it's not forever. And quite frankly, it's so isolating. And the challenge is that we fear asking for help. And help as a friend, help as a conversation, but like it's never worth it. It's like I have a little bit of guilt for what I put people through, even using it as a ask for help tool, knowing the effects that come after. Like there's no finish line. Like when it's done, it's done. Like there's no coming back. There's no hit the rewind button. Like it's permanent and those consequences live on forever. And like you won the 1 in 330 trillion chance to be here. That's not an accident. It's a miracle. And like, no matter how hard things are or how bad things get, like you can, and I've done this for years. I go watch interviews with people that attempted their life and survived, and they all share one thing in common. They're like, the moment I jumped, I realized I made a mistake.
Ooh,
Or the moment I did it, I realized I wanted to be here. And I know from personal experience that when emotions get that high, it feels real, but your heart isn't driving. Your clear decisions aren't driving. The emotion is, and you can't process them alone. Like there's a reason they say the devil's in the details because the details get you stuck in your head, not your heart, and God's in your heart. If you're negotiating with yourself, if you're ruminating, you're in the wrong bucket because there's no path out of that bucket except to be witnessed and loved in it and have a different perspective. So, like, ask anybody, somebody, a stranger, anybody, and just get out of the situation that you're in and just find a different perspective because there's no amount of money, no amount of anything I do in my life that will ever bring them back or bring those kids' fathers back or their husband back or any of it. And as a Marine and somebody who's known a lot of Marines, I understand the ones that were lost in combat. I understand the ones that did those things. The ones that I can't understand how we come home and lose them there because it just feels like it's never worth it. Never. Like everybody has value to give. Everybody has a gift, even if you can't see it. There's a reason. And like you got to give the reason a chance.
this is exactly why I wanted to have this conversation. Is why I kind of laid it out the way that it is, starting that you're successful. Looks like you have everything. I mean, you're doing really well in life. You got a great perspective. I would say you're pretty happy in life right now. And
Oh, I'm the happiest I've ever been.
that's
Like I'm like a pig
amazing.
in
That's
poop.
freaking amazing because to like get where you are today and go through everything that you went through. And I know we covered like some of it, not even like we didn't
Some
even
of it.
deep dive
Yeah.
in all of it. Like
Yeah.
it was to show people that you might be going through a bunch of crap. You can still find a way through it. And you just said you're the happiest you are today. Like people need to learn from that. Like it might not be tomorrow, it might not be a year from now, it might not be 5 years from now, but it can happen. It really can happen.
It can. And just to hit a point on this, happiness doesn't have a finish line. It's a choice every day that requires evidence. Evidence requires action, and action doesn't come from rumination. It comes from planting seeds that have never been planted before, which means no matter where you are, or what you're feeling, or what you're doing, or what you're going through, you have an entire life or situation of things that you did or didn't do that are making you feel that way. So the question is, what can you do differently today? And just one thing that can give you evidence that there is another possibility. And it requires small steps. Like I'll say this all day and I don't swear, but motivation's bullshit. It doesn't exist. It's a byproduct of evidence of taking new actions that then builds into that. Like you have to have faith before you have results. And when you have faith, you have to swing the bat and you have to just start making choices. And like, if you want to laugh, it's what about Bob? It's baby steps, like genuine baby steps. And even last 18 months ago, 19 months ago, and I got hit with the reality, like my 5-year-old son's looking at his quote unquote successful, healthy father who's 5'7" and was 260 pounds. Like really. And I told myself every story, right? Well, you had it, you lost it, you're almost 40, you're never going to lose it again. You're just not destined to be that way. And like I'm in the best shape of my life at 40, but it wasn't intensity. All I did was make a commitment to walk every single day. And I'll even share a model. I use this model with my
Yeah.
clients. The challenge is that I was going into everything with intensity, and people overvalue intensity and undervalue consistency, because consistency builds habits, it builds behaviors, it stacks evidence. And so I was like, I need to change something. And I was like, I'm going to go for a walk every day. So I asked myself 2 questions. On my best day, what would allow me to hit my goal? Like if I feel great, if I'm running unicorns and rainbows, I'm like, I'm going to walk for an hour a day. That's like 10,000 steps. Then I asked myself the most important question. On my absolute worst day, when the world is stacked against me and I feel like I can't do anything, but I remember that I want to live, what's the minimum I can commit to knowing a moment can't be wasted? And I wrote 10 minutes. My goal every day was to hit my minimum and protect that consistency. That is genuinely what has saved my life and led to more success than anything I've ever had. And I call it the wedge of expectations. On your best day, on your worst day, because we make these plans when we're feeling incredible or we're feeling really sad and we overcommit and we set ourselves up for failure. But this is a game of consistency. On my best day, every day, I'll watch scripture, read the Bible for an hour. What's the minimum I commit to every day? 5 minutes. But I haven't missed a day in 2 years.
Wow.
And I don't think I'll ever miss a day again, because to be really honest with myself, it's hard to say that I can't find 25 minutes a day in my entire day to hit my minimums in my faith, in my body, in my mindset, or in my business. And that's genuinely how I operate my day. And the funny thing is that when was the last time you're like, I'm going to go for a walk for 10 minutes and got 10 minutes in and realized like, oh, I can just go for 20. I can just go for 30. But if you move the starting line, nothing will ever change. But if you start the race, you actually have a chance of finishing it.
Mm,
So
freaking
make it
awesome.
easy to start the race.
This is freaking awesome. I couldn't say it any better than that. You define what happiness is to you, but I want to ask you, from somebody that's gone through all this trauma, but has also made a lot of money, been an entrepreneur, you've had your own business, you've been a bestseller with your book, you've had a lot of successes as well. And you said you just sold it all, you gave away your company, you got rid of all
Yeah.
this stuff. For somebody that's
Yeah.
really struggling to find happiness, like what makes you happy? Where can people find happiness, like true happiness, not just things that they think will make them happy?
Yeah, I love this question. Nobody's ever asked me this question, and I love this because I have an interesting perspective. Not once does the Bible mention happiness in the entire existence. It mentions usefulness. And to be happy, you have to be useful. But to be useful, you have to choose to use yourself as a gift and do something with it. Because if your happiness is dictated by outside circumstances, you'll always feel empty. But if you choose your perspective, then you can create the evidence and results that lead to happiness. And it's genuinely from being useful. It's chop wood and carry water. It's any way that you want it to be. It's having a faith in something greater than yourselves, giving away what you want to get. Like that's one of my favorite personal development quotes that they taught me. And they're like, the challenge that most people have is they want something, but they're not willing to create it. And they're like, give away what you want to get. Like, what do you mean? They're like, well, you want to be happy, right? You're depressed, you're sad. I'm like, yeah. They're like, go give happiness to somebody else. They're like, oh, you want to be excited? I'm like, yeah, yeah. They're like, go get somebody else excited. That absolutely changed my life because that's being useful and it's creating the evidence and it changes our brain chemistry. And quite frankly, and this has been studied scientifically over and over and over again, gratitude is the number one scientifically proven way to change our perspective from anxiety and doubts into happiness. And you've heard it a million times. You can't get anything more unless you're grateful for what you have, but that stops from making everything we have wrong. Like you have to be grateful for the ups, you have to be grateful for the downs, you have to be grateful for the resistance, for the struggles, for the sickness, because what you're really doing is changing your reticular activating system to focus on the positive and you find more of it. And another famous personal development quote is what you resist persists. And if all you focus on is how bad and how hard it is, the only thing you see is bad and hard. Everyone's like, oh, that's so bull. I'm like, really? Ready? If you've ever bought a new car, you were really, really excited to buy this red Jeep and you're like, I want it, I want it, I want it. Then you have it. And then the next day you realize 45 people in town have it. And you're like, why did I buy this Jeep? Those 45 Jeeps were there before, but you couldn't see them because your brain wasn't tuned into that frequency. It's called your reticular activating system. The trap that we fall into is we think that our happiness comes from changing our actions, but it comes from changing our beliefs, and we start to see evidence differently. And so the mistake is most people try to do things to become somebody to have the results, but you have to be that person, do things as that new person to have the results. And that's our perspective. And so I'd say happiness starts from having gratitude for where you are and being useful with it. And then asking yourself, what habits, actions, choices can you make that align with that person that you want to be? And then go be useful and stack the evidence in your favor. And you'll realize that that's been the game the whole time.
I can tell you've thought a lot about this. Your answers are mind blowing, absolutely incredible. And I'm going to keep giving you questions. Let's see how far you can go.
Let's go. I can do this all day.
Um, so I have a feeling the answer is yes. I want to know, are you grateful now? Would you change anything if you had the opportunity?
No,
And you say no, but I'm not done yet. Before your son was born, if I asked you, are you grateful now? What would your answer have been?
I wasn't truly grateful till about 3 years ago. Truly, truly grateful. And the answer to this is I wouldn't change a thing. And if you presented me with an option right now, I would relive every single moment the same way. And I realized that the game is won from becoming the person who can win the game. And one of my favorite quotes that I tell myself is we forget that when we ask God to move mountains, we wake up with a shovel.
Hmm.
And one of my dear friends, an incredible businessman, says the challenge that most people have is they haven't become the person to have the business they desire. And when we ask for things, we have to remember that just because you want them doesn't mean you're the person to keep them or have them yet. And there's a path in front of you that creates that option. Just like Joseph Campbell's hero's journey, everyone thinks the game ends when you slay the dragon. There's one more step. You have to return to the village to teach them the lessons, and then a new dragon appears. Or, as Tucker put it so eloquently in his kitchen one night when we were drunk on wine, I don't drink anymore. He's like, your biggest challenge, Doors, is you think you surpassed and summited the mountain. I'm like, yeah. And he's like, and then you realize it was a false summit and there's another mountain. I'm like, yeah. He's like, did you miss the point where you have to fall down the backside to fully climb the next one again? And I was like, oh, right. And that's where experience comes from. And that's where life comes from. And that's where, like lessons come from. But The only difference between a mistake and a choice is our perspective and how we see it.
Mm.
Mistakes come when we set our intention and our goal, and the situation didn't work out in an ideal outcome, and we become a victim to it. A choice is, oh, I did this, this worked, this didn't work, this is what I'm going to do differently next time. And it's an empowered choice. And I believe, and I'm young, I'm only 40, I've lived a lot of life, but the entire purpose of life is to make as many mistakes as possible, to learn the lessons, to shorten the gap between them all, to keep growing in whatever area of life you choose to apply it. Because the moment you think there's a finish line, you've already lost the game. You just haven't felt the pain yet. Because if we just sit here all day and we don't eat clean and we don't move our body and we don't flex our brains, they atrophy. If you don't move a muscle, it dies. If you don't flex your brain, it dies. If you don't use your heart, it dies. Compassion is a muscle. Empathy is a muscle. Giving is a muscle. And if you don't use any of them, they die. And so to think that there's a finish line means we've just chosen to quit the race before we ever had a chance to win. So it really boils down to, in whatever way or whatever series of cards that you were dealt, no matter which way you slice at it, you're not getting a new deal. So either enjoy playing the game and figure out how to do the best with the hand you had until you get dealt another one, or you're just going to be stuck with that same hand, wondering why you didn't get pocket aces, but they'll never come. We forget that the best baseball players in the world get paid $30 million a year to only hit the ball 30% of the time.
Mm-hmm.
They don't stop swinging. And if they swing enough, they'll hit that game. If we imagine that every quarterback who threw a pass and threw an interception is like, I'll never play football again, they wouldn't be really good at their sport, would they? It's how we learn. We see kids stand up and try to walk. The reason they win is because when they fall down, they don't say, oh, I'm never walking again. They learn a lesson, they pick it up, and they go. Quite frankly, the way that I describe this to people, you want to know why babies cry when they're born? I'm like, it's because the moment they got separated from God.
Mm.
And then they have 8 years of no paradigm to be themselves. And then around eight, we as the world tell them who they're supposed to be. And they start operating in that way until one of a few things happens. They have a midlife crisis or a catalytic moment that changes their perspective. And then they spend the rest of their life trying to remember what it was like to be a kid again, to get close to God again
Mm.
until they're gone. And so let's just skip the whole process and remember that kids are the greatest teachers in the world. They choose love, they choose forgiveness, they never quit, they're resilient. They keep picking it up. They're not a victim to what happens to them. You can have a buddy throw sand in your face at the playground and say, I hate him. And then 2 minutes later, they're hugging it out and cuddling and eating a popsicle together.
Mm-hmm.
We can learn a lot from them. And so I genuinely wouldn't change any of it. But it wasn't until about 3 years ago where all of this collapsed in me and I realized that I was creating my own prison, because no matter what, the cards are in front of me and it's my job to play them. And if I don't like the hand I was dealt, I need to play the hand and find another deal. But no one's going to play my hand for me. And if all I do is stare at them and complain, quite frankly, I'm going to lose. And so I wouldn't change a thing. And now it's almost like a running joke in my life. And I even shared with you at the beginning of the show, like I had my incredible studio, hung the last light after 3 years, emergency, need you out of the office that we agreed for 20 years. And I was like, great, I'll build one in my house. 3 weeks later, you have to move. I'm like, man, God really has a sense of humor. But I can either become a victim of them or I can choose what I do with it and realize there's probably something bigger at play that's out of my control. And the only way to lose is if I stop playing the game.
Freaking awesome perspective. Man, everything you said just like rang so true to me. It's like a vision I try to achieve all the time and I fail constantly, but I try to have a perspective like that. I try. Some days it does not go my way for sure. And something that you said, you say mistakes, I say failure. I think we
Yeah.
both view them kind of the same. I've had a few episodes where I've kind of talked about like my son and what's important for me to teach my son. And one of them is like failure is only failure if you don't really learn from it and
Yep.
apply to that. And it's a point in the right direction of where to
Yeah.
go. And that is like one of the number one things I want to teach my son is just get up. That means try something else. Try again, go in a different direction. If that doesn't work, then correct that, you know, and
Yep.
I absolutely love that perspective. So when you said that, it's just like, yes, I really connected with that because that is just so important for me to teach my son. And your, it sounds like your son, how many kids do you have now?
I have two. I have a 19-year-old bonus daughter and a 7-year-old son.
That's amazing. And I can imagine you're way ahead of me in the game here, but I can imagine you might have a hard time seeing them fail, but you almost kind of have to let them fail, right? So they can figure this out on their own.
Yeah, because I realize that if I get in the way, they don't learn the lesson, right? And
Right.
like, why am I successful as an entrepreneur? Because of what happened to me as a kid,
Yeah.
because of what I got to experience. Now it's really, really easy. And I'm like, oh, well, this makes a whole lot of sense now. Oh, if I didn't go through that, I wouldn't. Oh. And then like you start to like look back and you're like, oh, it's almost like this was perfectly designed for me to be exactly where I am. And so, like, my joke for people is like, I used to wake up every day and have 1,000 check engine lights in my dashboard. And the reason I lost is because I never diagnosed the code and I ignored them all and I wondered why my engine broke down. So then I
Mm,
went through a season of my life where I'm like, oh, I should probably read the code and see if it's engine oil or just windshield wiper fluid because then I know what to do with it. Then I got to a point in my life like 3 years ago where there were no more check engine lights. They're like, what'd you do? And I was like, I wake up and I floor my car into the wall as fast as possible. They're like, why? I'm like, because if I don't have one, I better create one or I'm not going to like the one that's created for me because
mm,
there is no finish line in this game. None. And we think about it with athletes, we think about it with anything, but even to the mistake thing. Can you imagine if every time we cooked a recipe and it didn't turn out ideal, we're like, I'm never cooking again?
right.
It's life, right? And the more you practice it, the better you get. And it's no different with our emotional resiliency. It's no different with our relationship to challenges. It's no different with accomplishing new goals. But quite frankly, and I'll just say it, we live in a society that celebrates stagnation and is more so committed to people failing than they are winning because you're more controllable. So screw it. Get off the phone and go create something in your life. Like go create the results, like be the evidence. But you have to start every race with a single step. And no matter how much you plan, you might be running an ultra marathon and you have a plan for mile 99, but I'll promise you one thing, if you don't start the first mile, that plan's never going to come to fruition and the race is going to
Mm,
change the moment you start. So don't overplan, don't overcommit, just start now because the easiest way to learn if you don't like the taste of the swimming pool is put your toe in it and be like, "Yep, not going in that pool again. Great. Now you know what's the next pool? What's the next pool?" And that's where the game is won. And quite frankly, I've been through 12-step programs for, opiates. I've been through them for sex and love addiction. I've been through all of them. And it's really all, and even in the military, what's the one thing that we do whenever anything gets hard is we shrink our world down to as small as possible to control it, to take the first step to unlock whatever's going to come. It's taught everywhere. And it's no different with us as a human being. But at some point, we have to shrink it down and make that choice, not make it harder, not overwhelm ourselves, not complicate the process, because every one of those moments is a moment missed to change the evidence in front of us and change the results that we want. And so I've genuinely just learned is that the more I sit with my thumbs up my butt and do nothing and complain about it or get in the way or like, what could this look like? What could this look like? I'm getting in the way of either side becoming a possibility. So it's easier for me to swing, take a step in the wrong direction and be like, don't want to step there again. Lesson learned, and adjust and adjust and adjust than it is to sit there and wonder the entire time.
almost like you gotta ask yourself, like, what's the worst that can happen, right? Like, I just think about like when I was younger, I was like, I'm afraid to ask a girl for her phone number. Like,
Yeah,
who can at worst, I go home, go to sleep, and start a new day. You know what I mean? Like,
1,000%, a thousand
like
percent.
who
And
cares?
then you realize how often we advocate our happiness and
Yeah,
our sovereignty
yeah,
based on the preconceived judgments that we think are going to happen. But yet, the moment we put them into the world, none of them ever happen. Quite
right,
frankly, most
right.
of the time, the opposite happens.
Yeah, very true.
And we just have to be willing to get the evidence. And so it's play the game, like
Yeah,
play the game. Because at the
freaking
end of the
love
day,
this.
and I even say this to entrepreneurs, I was like, what are you worried about? They're like, well, they're not going to like it. I'm like, are they paying your bills? Like, no, I'm like, great. Well, you can start giving merit to the people that are willing to pay your bills if you don't do what you're going to do. But other than that, you got to realize that there's only one person you're negotiating with. And I'm like, who is it? And they're like, oh, that's right, yourself. So at
Mhm.
which point are you going to choose to end the argument and just try?
It reminds me, I really want to say I brought this up to Jesse in our podcast about the Kobe Bryant. I remember seeing a reel a few times how he just doesn't negotiate with himself. He makes a contract with himself and he doesn't negotiate. He signed the
Yep.
contract. He's showing up at 5 a.m. every morning to work out. I don't
Yeah.
negotiate. I promise.
There's a Tim Grover wrote about that in his book Winning because Kobe was one of his clients. It's a really, really good breakdown of that. Even my CEO, who I love to pieces, she's incredible. One of my favorite things she says is, I'm not negotiating with my feelings. And one of the things that I say to people is, the reason most people lose is because you don't understand what commitment is. Commitment is, I'm going to do it regardless of how I feel, not
Mm,
based on how I feel.
yeah.
When we make a commitment to be a
Awesome.
parent, I'll tell you right now, the amount of times that you and I have woken up in the middle of the night, 2 a.m., 3 a.m., not once was our first thought, I'm so excited to get out of bed right now.
I can attest.
And I'll be honest, most of the time my thought is like, stop crying, please handle yourself. I don't have the energy, I don't have the capacity. But before I even consciously realize that I'm standing in that room and helping my son,
Yeah.
that's commitment. Commitment is, I'm important enough and I love myself enough to keep my word to myself, and I'm not going to let my feelings get in the way.
Yeah.
Because
That's
the
pretty
moment they
awesome.
do, you stop yourself from becoming the person to create the results. And it's not easy. I'm not sitting here saying that it's easy, it's simple. And we overcomplicate the process the entire time. It's not about massive swings or big things. Sometimes, like you said, and even coming out of recovery and getting off opiates, like I used to take like 30, 40 like opiates a day. Like that was normal.
Mm,
I didn't get off of those instantly. I tried cold turkey, but then literally there were days where I was like 1 minute by 1 minute by 1 minute. Like it was like, how many little choices can I make that support me?
mm,
And the way that I saw it is like, okay, cool. Well, if the day split up into 100 and today I made 50 good choices and 50 bad choices, I better make one more good choice and tilt the game in my favor. Great. Eventually 51-49, 60-40,
right.
70-30.
Like
And I
1%
probably
better every day.
and I
1%.
probably live 80-20 now, where I still
Yeah.
make 20% of my choices. Like I still fall into YouTube rabbit holes and end up on Netflix and like emotionally eat and binge eat that pizza last night.
Yeah.
But even then, as somebody who is a bulimic, the funny thing is I don't make it wrong. I celebrate it. I'm like, God, that
Yeah.
pizza was so freaking good. And I'm glad I enjoyed it, because you're not in a monogamous relationship with food. There's no
Yeah.
cheating, only choices. When we
Dude,
put
there's like
labels,
so many rabbit holes we still need to go down.
oh, we can do
I
part
want
two if you
you.
want. I'm
Oh,
totally game.
and three and four and five.
Done, done.
I have another question that I really want to hit on in being a new dad. I know, like,
Yeah.
we're talking about being dads and parents, and I think it's important because I feel that we are kind of filters for the lessons that we want to teach to our kids, and perhaps keep stuff away from our kids. I think it's important to talk about. And the saying iron sharpens iron is coming into my mind. And I feel like you are iron, right? Like you've gone through just a gauntlet through life. And look where you are. Is part of you somewhat nervous, or I don't know how to phrase this, but like, do you feel the need to apply pressure or some kind of hard times or some kind of iron to your child's life so they can grow up and experience hard times and hardship? Or are you kind of somewhat focused on creating the exact opposite childhood that you grew up in, that got you to where you are today, that you said you don't regret at all? Like,
Yeah.
as a dad, how do you handle that
Great question.
situation?
That's a great question. I am focused on creating a completely different childhood, but applying pressure with love and not his identity being wrapped up in the results or
What
my
does that look
daughter's.
like? Apply pressure with love.
So, like, for actually, God, I've never talked about this. Like, for example, there's a lot of parents who are like anti-tablet, right? Or you can't watch this, or you can't do this. My son is 7 years old. He does not have age restrictions on anything, but he sits down and he's next to me. And every time something comes up, I'm like, hey, how did that make you feel? And he's like, it felt bad. And this was mean. And this was wrong. And I didn't like this. I'm like, great. Well, at this point, you have a choice. If you keep watching that, you're going to feel that way. And if you don't, don't. And like yesterday, I picked him up from camp and I walked up and he was crying and he had a bad day. And he's like, Dad, I had a bad day. People bullied me. They called me dumb. They called me great. I'm like, amazing. How did it make you feel? And he's like, it felt like this. And I was like, do you believe any of it's true? And he's like, no. And I was like, do you think that we can stop this from happening in the world? And he's like, no. And I say, great. So how would you like to go about the rest of our day? And he's like, well, I want to do this. I'm like, do you want to come to school tomorrow? And he's like, yeah. And I was like, what are you going to do tomorrow? And he's like, I'm going to tell them to leave me alone. And I'm like, well, what if they don't? He's like, I'll tell them again. And I'm like, amazing. Do you believe any of those things? And he's like, no, I don't. I'm like, what do you believe about yourself? And he's like, well, I believe I'm amazing and I have a good heart. I'm like, and all of those things are true. Like, I'll even teach Schrodinger's cat theory to my 7-year old of like multiple truths at the same time. And for me, like, my job is to create a safe environment that my son gets to identify who he is as a person and feel safe in exploring it. But I can't stop him from riding his bike with no helmet and learning lessons. And he does it all the time. And even with food, like, my son had a massive injury as a child and has some like gut issues and things like that. And when he eats dairy or he eats gluten, guess what? He gets sick. I don't limit him from those things. And so he went out yesterday and was out with one of my best friends, and he came back and he's like, Dad, I had ice cream and I had blank. And I was like, okay, how does that feel? He's like, I feel good. 2 hours later, he's crying and he feels like this. I'm like, hey, buddy, what's up? And he's like, Dad, this. I'm like, what did you eat today? And he's like, well, I had this and this. And I'm like, and what happens when you have that? And he's like, oh. And I was like, remember, Daddy's told you 100 times, but you won't learn until it's your decision. I was like, at some point, you have to recognize that every choice you make has a consequence or a positive reaction, but you are making the choices. And so, like, I talk to my son like he's a grown adult.
Mm.
And I just use declarative language and I ask him questions and I help him find the same perspectives I have. And yes, I lend my experience. Like, my son will never experience emotional abuse or yelling or any of those things, but life is hard. The world is hard, but it doesn't mean it has to make us hard. And quite frankly, my mission is, yes, I might be iron underneath my skin, but I want to be a walking heart on the outside for anybody that I meet. And I teach my son forgiveness and judgment. And my son has seen me attacked and seen people yell at me, and then me ended up praying with those people or hugging those people because that's the example that I want to be. And quite frankly, the moment I let my son see the world define my actions and choices, that's when he allows the world to define his actions and choices. And so the reason I'm in my Bible, the reason I choose forgiveness, the reason I get coaching, the reason I cry to my friends, and they're challenged by it. Some of my friends like, I don't know how you chose forgiveness in this. And I was
Mm.
like, because there is no other choice. That's the man that I want to be and the man that I want to show my son. And so I want my son to feel fierce love for himself and everybody and love the people that don't love him and support the people that don't support him because I don't want him to ever change who he is based on evidence of the outside world. So I bring it in everywhere. Every phone call, every school trip, every example with our friends, every event. He sits in on my coaching calls. He sees me consult clients and he can do and choose with that what he wants. But I want to be the example. And the one thing I know as a parent is kids don't listen to a word we say, they watch what we do.
Mm.
And if you want a sobriety barometer, understand that every choice, every decision, every action, every I'm tired, I'm not doing this, I'm sitting on the couch is being witnessed. And that is the biggest motivator that I've ever had to constantly sharpen my own iron, but to do it from a place of love and not intensity and not, I'm going to bulldoze the world. Like, no, I want to love the world into success. Like, I want to love you into your results, not drill instructor you into them. And that's where I've had the most profound breakthroughs in my life is instead of intensely attacking things, Goggins style, nothing wrong with that. I love things that hard. And that's where I win the most. Is it hard? Yeah. Does it stretch me? Yeah. When you're accused of domestic violence or abuse or theft and you're slandered, is it easy in those moments to choose love? No. Is it worth it every single time? Yeah, because I'm not drinking anybody else's poison and you're not
Mm.
changing my heart. And literally, like, I think Mike Tyson is one of the best shamans in the world, consume him all the time. But there's a 1 minute and 11 clip I have of him and he's talking to a rapper on his show and the guy's talking about how he made it out. And if you do him wrong, he just cuts you out. And Mike Tyson interrupts him and says, you lost because the devil's your master because he changed you. And those people are still the same.
Mm.
And it cuts every single time.
Wow.
And I believe the only testimony I have in this world is the testimony of my state of being as a man, no matter what people say about me, no matter what they do about me. Because the worst thing that happens is I say, I'm so sorry. that I made you feel that way. Please help me understand, and I will commit to making it better. And those conversations happen daily. Yesterday with my woman, 2 days ago with one of my business partners, he called me after not speaking for 3 weeks and he's like, I need to clear this, this, and this. And I was like, and it hurt. It hurt that I said those things from a place of exhaustion and scarcity and things like that. And I was like, thank you so much for the feedback. He's like, do you have anything to say? I'm like, thank you.
Mm.
Like, thank you. I was bawling my eyes out. And he's like, I have these conversations with people all the time. You're the first person who hasn't attacked me back. I'm like, no, brother, like, this is you loving me. You're telling me where my weak spots are. You're telling me where I had an intention, but my impact didn't match my intention. And now I know how to be better. And that's the way that I choose to operate now.
Dude, I'm thankful you're coming back on. I'm grateful. I have gratitude for that. I have gratitude for this entire conversation. I mean, who would have thought George Bryant is you're a father that people want to emulate? Like this is
Yeah.
I've learned so much. I mean, personally, like, yeah, I can be selfish with this podcast, asking questions I want to know. I mean, granted, I want everyone to learn from it. But I'm taking away from that. I'm literally going to take away from that and apply it to my relationship with my son. That's freaking unbelievable. I was kidding, but I actually really am very thankful and grateful for this. This is freaking believable.
I am too. And the one thing I want to say, and I want to be really honest with everybody, just because I talk about this doesn't mean I have it all figured out. It means
mm,
I keep practicing it every day. There is no finish line. There is no, oh yeah, he has this all figured out. No, no, no. I make probably more mistakes than all of you, but the definition of masculinity is saying yes, realizing we're going to make mistakes, apologizing, owning it, learning, and saying yes again.
mm-hmm. You take a
And
swing. Keep
though,
taking
so
swings.
there's no finish line, there's no perfect picket fence, but it reminds me of one of my favorite quotes that I think is a good landing place. And a shaman said this to me, and he says, "A student says I already know, and a master says thanks for the reminder."
Mm.
And that one's carried me very, very far because the
Wow.
moment I think I know, I've already lost.
You can apply that to your life like immediately.
Yep. And so it's sometimes as hard as it here is like, hey man, you're being disconnected, or I don't like how you said that. It's like, hey, thank you for the reminder. Thanks for reminding me to choose love and to choose presence. And thank you and thank you and thank you. And that quote has changed my life.
We need more of that in the world. Wow. We need more George Bryants in the world. Who would have thought, right?
I'm the last person. And then literally I'll have my friends and pastors and I'm like, why me? And they're like, you read your Bible, you realize it's always the most unsuspecting. And I was like, yeah, no, 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 no. I'm like, no, he doesn't call the qualified, he qualifies the called. My whole
I
life was a qualification to love people.
I hesitate asking this question, but I really want to know this.
Ask.
You take so many swings, and I appreciate that more than anything. I love that, which leads me to believe the answer might be no. But do you have any regrets? And what are your thoughts when it comes to living life with regret? Because that is like one of my main drivers in life. And it has been, I'd probably say, for the last 10 years and will be forever. I don't want
Yeah.
to get to my deathbed and say, I wish I could, I wish I woulda.
The only regrets that I have are for the swings that I took that hurt people. And I never rectified, apologized, and owned the hurt before it was too late to.
Mm,
And so the rest of it is chalked up to being a human and doing the best with what we can. But the only regret that I would ever carry is causing harm or damage to anybody and never cleaning it up and finding a place of forgiveness and love. And there are a
mm,
few people and a few choices, and they were dark times of my life, not intentional, but those people aren't here anymore. And it took me a
mm,
long time to rectify that because everything I've done, I've learned something from, and I don't regret anything. But when it comes to relationships and people, it never feels good to hurt somebody intentionally or unintentionally. And the only time that wound continues is when we don't clean it up. And the only regret I have is not picking up the phone or waiting 15 years to call my mom because of stories I was telling myself, or
mm,
not saying things to people, not realizing how finite life is and how at any moment the switch goes out. And that's why I'm so authentic. It's why I'm so open. It's why I'm so honest. And sometimes I say things, I'm like, sorry, that's how I felt. Like I just had to say it because I don't ever want to have the moment to either say something that could positively impact somebody's life or stop them from negatively impacting their life. And me have to sit there and wonder why I never said anything.
Just let that be a lesson to people listening to this, right? Like, don't let your regrets be their regrets, and pick up the phone and just make a call. And
Yeah.
living with regret is one of the hardest things ever. And
Hmm.
like I said, that's something I'm trying to avoid to the max before my
Yeah.
day comes, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
George, I would keep dragging this on if I didn't know you were coming. But you're
Yeah, no,
coming
we will do as many as you like, and I'm getting into like
back.
UTI territory now with like having to pee.
Dude, yeah, man, you should have
And,
told me.
and so I would love I would be an absolute honor. Like genuinely, I feel like I could talk to you for years. Like I also just want to, while we're on your show, acknowledge you. Like your presence, your stature, like how safe you make me feel like speaks to you as a man. Like
Thank
this
you.
is one of the easiest, and I haven't done a podcast like this in a very long time, nor shared a lot of what I shared today. And that's also a testament to like the space that you hold. And so the one thing that I'll say in front of everybody is you might want to pat yourself on the back a little more than you already do because you're probably way closer than you think. And
Wow.
based on the depth of this conversation and the awarenesses and the way that you ask it, just be careful not to fall in the trap that you're not already there because the secret is recognizing you are.
Well, that hits home. Well, first of all, I just want to say I really appreciate that. Second of all, imposter syndrome is something I've gone up and down with recently. I genuinely appreciate that. That means more than me to me than I think you probably realize. That it means everything. I'm just gonna keep doing what I'm doing and keep
Yeah,
taking
I'll get mad
swings,
at you if
right?
you don't. Like, I'm like a rabid pit bull at this point. Like, if you stop this show based on this episode, like, I will hunt you down and be like, what are you doing?
That's unbelievable. As much as I would love to keep hearing about how great I am as an interviewer, I want to talk about where people can find you before you get your UTI. Where can people find you and follow you because they need to like immediately?
Yeah. So the one thing I'll say is that if I talked about anything, if I mentioned anything that tickled or you could use support on, like you have my full permission to slide into my DMs on Instagram. Instagram is the best place to connect with me. My Instagram is it's George Bryant. ITS is included. The it's is included. Worst name to choose, but it's George Bryant. The it's is a part of the name. Um, and I mean that like it's an open door policy for anything. Even if you want to send me a message like I want to share something that no one else knows, you have my permission. I will hold it. I will support you the best that I can, any way that I can, guide you to a resource that I have. Like just know no one's alone in any of this, and it doesn't matter what vein or what bucket. Like you have my permission to do it, and if I don't have the answer, I probably know somebody who does. And then the second place is my podcast. Like if it can support in any way, I focus on giving everything I know and everything I have my podcast. And it's designed to be a tool and a medicine cabinet if you need it. It's business, it's mindset, it's entrepreneurship, it's heart, it's relationships. It's my heart on a sleeve in the movie that everybody wants, just sharing it in bite-sized chunks, piece by piece. And so my Instagram is it's George Bryant. And if you want to see the pinkest website ever with the podcast on it, it's called mindofgeorge.com. And you can read the rest of my story there. But genuinely, for everybody listening, like thank you. Thanks for riding
Yes.
the ride with me. And
Yeah.
also thanks for being an either willing or unwillingly, knowingly participant to that story and the parts of it that I shared. And I'm excited to unpack the rest, but also thank you for giving me the one gift and both of us the one gift that we can't give back to you, which is time. And
Yeah.
so the one thing that I'll say is if anything tickled, if anything landed, just pick up the phone and put it into action. Like don't let it become shelf help. Don't let
Mm.
another day go by. Don't let another moment go. Like now's the time. And whatever it is, one small change because you're worth it. So you just have to pick it up and do the work.
No better way to wrap it up.
So
It's
thank you.
it's it's been an absolute pleasure, and I cannot wait to do this again. Woo, that was a lot to intake, but so worth it. You're the man. You're the absolute man. We will talk soon, and Yeah,
Just so you know, and I'll share this with everybody. The reason
yeah.
it's called the Mind of George show is I promise you it's way crazier in here. So I only share the safest parts with you because if you think it's overwhelming on that side, just imagine what it's like on the inside. So like have at it. And I appreciate you guys.
Yeah, man. Follow and subscribe. Everything you just said will be in the show notes. So just scroll on down, click follow, subscribe. Oh, amazing. We'll talk soon, George.
Thank you.